Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, I want to welcome back our guest, John Lockley. He joined us on the program earlier in the last couple of years, and he's back on our show to share his remarkable journey to navigate the deep racial and cultural divide following his calling of becoming what is known as a Sangoma in the Xhosa lineage of South Africa. It's a tribe that Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu were a part of. Along the way, John endures incredible illness, suffering, and meets studies with experienced spiritual teachers from a variety of lineages and breaks cultural boundaries to awaken in the world of the shaman. Now, I know as a listener you're probably wondering, what does this all mean to you? Well, that is, when are you going to break away from the world of materialism and the way it seems to be and get into the world of the way that you get to experience directly? That's certainly what we're doing here on the Beyond 50 radio program. And it isn't to be preach either, but to show you a way that your special gifts, once they are connected to a world, you will see that life almost seems to lay down and serve you as you serve the world with these special gifts. His newest book is Leopard Warrior. It's a journey into the African teachings of ancestry, instinct, and dreams. And I'd like to welcome again John Lockley. John, thank you for being on the program today.
My pleasure, Daniel. Nice to be back.
Now, this story here has a lot of intensity, but it also should get a lot of readers as they read this to really start thinking quite a bit about the journey they've been on since birth and as to whether or not they feel that they're actually naturally or, let's say, spiritually going in the right direction. This all started as you were a medic in Africa, and I think you were inspired to move into the direction as healer and shaman based on your experience working with a young man or boy by the name of Emmanuel. Tell us about that.
Yes. So I was in the South African Army. I was a medic at one of the military hospitals, and I had this calling through my dreams to work with death, to work with extreme illness. And at the age of 16, I had this dream where I was looking for gold in the Amazon, and as I woke up from the dream, a woman's voice said to me, in order for me to find my destiny, I had to come close to death. I had to work with suffering. So at that stage, it made sense for me to conscript or join the medical corps, because I was going to be drafted, or what you call conscripted, into the South African Army in a couple of years. So I chose to go into the medical corps to help people, and my idea was to become an operational medic or paramedic on the front lines, because at that stage we had a war on in Angola which went for about 10 years, and it was equivalent of our Vietnam in South Africa, and it was a horrific war. And so when I turned 18, I was conscripted into the South African Army, and I was accepted into the medical corps. And fortunately for me, towards the end of that year, the Angolan war ended. So when I went into the military hospital, I was just drafted into the hospital. I didn't have to go to the front lines. But the war ended literally a couple of months before, so we had a lot of casualties from the front lines from Angola. So this patient I had was called Manuel, and he was 21 years old, and he had suffered an incredibly traumatic car accident. It was one of these big army trucks that overturned, and he broke almost every bone in his body, and he was in a semi-coma. And for 6 weeks I nursed him, and I felt his life force going. I felt the pulse beneath my fingers. And the decision was made by the nursing staff and the family to turn off the machines keeping him alive. And that was about the last 3 weeks I was with him, or the last 2 weeks. But up until then, his mother was saying to me, or asking me every day whether he was going to live or die. And that's quite a heavy thing for an 18-year-old to hear from a mother, whether her son is going to live or die. And I said he's going to live, but in my heart I knew that he was in a very bad way. So I've had this sense of desperation inside of me, because we had the best medical team in the world, and this military hospital was very well funded. It was probably the equivalent of a private hospital overseas. And yet, with all the medical staff, we couldn't save his life, and there's nothing we could do in terms of connecting with him and his spirit. And I suppose every day his mother asked me how he was doing, and I couldn't communicate with him in any other way except his vital signs and listen to his pulse and his heartbeat and that kind of thing. So I felt a sense of desperation of wanting to connect more deeply with him, to give a message to his mother. So the decision was made to turn off the machines keeping him alive. And then I was asked as one of the medics to follow his vital signs as he started dying. And it was very, very traumatic. But at the same time, it was also a very beautiful experience because I got to really appreciate the gift of life and how we all take it for granted. So in that moment, I felt incredibly lucky to be alive, lucky to be healthy, and very fortunate to actually be in that position to be by Emmanuel's side and to watch him die. And then when he didn't die on my shift, but as I left his room, I remember praying like I've never prayed before, and I felt this anger inside of me that this was not right. This level of suffering was not right, and I prayed to God and all the angels and all the saints and all the spirits, and I said, please show me another way of healing, so that if I'm ever in this position again in future, I can do something. I can do something constructive. I can help the family. And then when I left the room, and then I started Zen meditation. And about 2 weeks later, a friend of mine was learning French, and the lady that he was studying from was also a lay nun, a lay Buddhist nun, under the well-known Zen master called Deshimaru from Japan. So she started training me in my little band of friends, and I took to it really, really, really well. I really loved it, and it seemed to answer the question of what is suffering. And so in Buddhism, they talk about suffering, and they say that life is impermanent, and life is suffering, and it's about moving through that to understanding your Buddha nature, that spark of life force inside of you. So I was meditating really hard, and I went on a 4-day retreat. And at the end of the 4-day retreat, I received this very strong dream, and it was a nighttime dream. And I was sleeping, and I had this dream, and in the dream I saw this man approach me, and he was what I call a witch doctor, because in those days I didn't know South African shamanism and the Sangoma culture because of apartheid and because of me being a white boy. So I saw this guy, the witch doctor, and he came to me, and he had all these skins around him, and he had the smell of herbs around him, and he had these very beautiful eyes, very, very, very sharp, piercing, diamond-like eyes, and his skin was very black and very dark, as he would be as a witch doctor in Africa. And there was a kind of a piercing intelligence and beauty about him. And I started speaking to him, and I said to him, I told him my situation, and I said to him that I wanted him to teach me about nature and about suffering, about everything. And he kept quiet, and I asked him 3 times. And the final time, after I asked him the 3rd time, he said to me, started speaking to me, and he said to me, in order for me to teach you the ways of my culture, you're going to suffer like you never suffered before, and you're going to come close to death, because this is the way we train people in my culture. This is the way you become a healer, that you have to come close to death, and this is the way my culture operates. And I said to him, okay, train me. I said, and then he said to me again, you do realize you're going to come close to death, and you're going to suffer more than you've ever suffered before. And I said, I already have suffered. And I said, I'm 18 years old, and if I don't learn this form of healing, my life is over, because I'm already in the South African army. I see immense suffering around me every day, and I've just lost one of my patients, and I've also put my beloved dog down, who was sick. And I said, what else is there for me? I'm only 18. So he didn't say a word. And next thing I saw this vision in front of me over the next 5 years and what was going to happen. And it all came to pass the following 5 years. And then when I woke up from the dream, I had all these boils on my legs. And I was happy, because I knew that he had accepted to train me as his apprentice. And I went to the hospital because I was working there as a medic, and I had contracted tick bite fever. And it was strange because all my other friends who went on the retreat, not one of them contracted tick-bite fever. So it was very mysterious. And then I went from one illness to the next for 7 years, and I got very, very sick. And that was during the time I went to South Korea, and I trained with the Zen masters in South Korea because I couldn't find my teacher in South Africa because being a white man, I wasn't able to go into the townships because it was segregated and I would have been arrested. So I suffered a lot with this apartheid situation.
Right.
And in our culture now, the Twazi illness is a very serious illness, and it's known as the international calling illness. It's to become a shaman, and it's found in all indigenous cultures. And it just so happened that I received this calling in a very indigenous way, and then the teachers and the shamans that I subsequently met have corroborated my story with themselves, and it's not about the color of your skin. So a lot of people nowadays are really caught up with skin color, and I know it's got to do with politics and things like that, but most of us can't really control what color skin we have, and I can't control that either. But I've received this very powerful calling, and this calling is about humanity. It's about helping people. So I suffered a lot with this in apartheid, not being able to find my teacher and coming close to death. And the whole job of the teacher is to medicate you with herbs and ceremony. And by the time I met my teacher many years later, she asked me what took me so long to come to her. She said, "We almost lost you." And I said to her, "Apartheid, Mom, apartheid." And she said, "We almost lost you." And she had tears in her eyes. And in that moment, we connected, our spirits connected and became one. And that's my story, And my story is quite long, but I think I'll stop now and let you ask me a few things.
Oh, that's fine. That's just the way the Leopard warrior can work sometimes. And I really enjoy the title of that because you consider the kind of respect they have on the African continent for the leopard, which is an extremely powerful animal and a spirit animal. And it's the same way in South America, especially in the Amazon. I mean, this is the elusive animal. This is the spirit animal. This is the big guy, the big cannon. And that's, I suppose, the title of the book, just to let folks know, is that's a level that you had to get at where you can actually be sort of camouflaged even if you were walking among people. So you kind of feel like there's a certain humility, if you will. And even though people might think humility, well, doesn't that kind of like mean playing weak? It's like, no, to have humility actually shows tremendous strength. But you talk about those sort of dualities throughout the book, that people can come to understand, that as you have light, there's also the shadow, those sort of things. And what was really unique, let's go ahead and start with the dreams, because this is how this all started for you. And, I think many people have had dreams. There's no doubt about it. And they get to a point sometimes where they start saying, okay, so what does the dream mean? Now, in this particular training, if you will, or rite of passage, initiation, to become this shaman, is that you were talking about how with the Zosa Sagoma is that you learn to walk between reality and an alternate reality. So, in other words, in waking reality and in dream reality, you learn to walk in between those two worlds. And I found that fascinating because you realize that in dreams, that reality is just as real as in being awake. And, certainly if anybody's ever read Carlos Castaneda's work and the teachings of Don Juan, they talk about that same very thing. And why don't we go ahead and talk about that at first, because this is also an arena that if people could come to understand dreaming, is that dreams are also another way that call you forth in unique ways that in the waking world your logical mind just couldn't wrap itself around. So that's the sense of dreaming. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I mean the dreaming is actually the oldest spiritual practice in the world, and it doesn't matter what culture you're from, what language you speak. As a human being, we have this natural faculty of dreaming, and nowadays it's starting to atrophy, and this is the concern I have and that I've been given in my own dreams.
Well, look at social media and the connection of technology and the immediacy of handheld phones. No wonder that stuff is seemingly evaporating like, cloud in the ethers.
Yes, but we can still dance that world. I mean, I have my iPhone and I do enjoy it, and I do enjoy technology, but because of my calling, I have to be very sensitive to technology and know when to turn off the machines, because at the end of the day, we are in control. We are in control of that phone.
You iPhone shamans, you're all alike.
Hey?
You iPhone shamans, you're all alike. Anyway, no, but I see the importance, and I wasn't trying to undermine it, but it's like sometimes people are connected so much to it that is reality for them. And it's like, no, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that you can go beyond. Anyway.
Yeah, and one of the most important reasons to connect with your dreams is because it's a way of connecting with your soul. And in traditional Xhosa and Zulu culture, we say if someone doesn't remember their dreams, it's a sign of soul sickness and they need to go and see a sangoma. Because if the individual is sick and not remembering their dreams, it's going to impact on the larger community, and they can be a danger to their community because they're not working from their humanity, they're not working from their spirit, from their soul. So this is a very, very important point, that you work on your dreams not just as an individual to help you, but you work on your dreams just to keep you connected with the world and with humanity.
You know, I want to hit right on that, for instance. What if you happen to be someone who can shut your eyes and, man, you're in the dream already, and you can wake up and you can go back into it, and you're right where you left off. You've even gotten to a level of lucidity, and you start challenging things in dreams that you know in the physical world you normally don't think you can do, like swimming underwater and breathing, flying, things like that. What would you say to someone like that?
I'd say that they have a wonderful gift and that they need to really work with that gift. And it was interesting for me, actually, because I was in Asheville giving a talk a couple of years ago, around about when I spoke to you last, I think, 2015 or 2014, I think. Anyway, this woman asked me a very similar question. She had the most phenomenal dreams. And then as she started telling me her dreams, I started feeling that she needed to ground herself a little bit more, because, you know, everything's on a spectrum of from one extreme to the other. And this particular lady had these such powerful dreams. My concern was, how was she going to be living her life? How grounded was she in her waking state? So I kept saying to her throughout the conversation in the talk, I said, well, she needs to make sure that she's really grounded before she sleeps and when she wakes up, and realize that the dream state is the dream state and the waking state is the waking state, and there is a difference. And afterwards, a very strange thing happened. I saw this old hat, like musty hat, left near the altar, and I asked one of the organizers, I said, what's this hat doing here? And they said, no, that was the lady who asked you that question, and she's actually homeless, sleeping in her car, and that was her exchange for coming to the talk.
Wow. You know, and that's very fascinating. You kind of almost probably wondered for a minute, was that real?
Well, it was very real, because she's living in a car and
right.
She's destitute and she's really suffering. And I felt that in the way she described her dreaming, because she was not grounded. So I went through that stage myself through my training of not being grounded, but having very, very psychic dreams. And I remember one particular dream I had. In reality, I was living on a farm, a friend's farm, and he had a Buddhist retreat center on his farm, and I was doing a lot of meditation, and that was my waking state. And then in the dream, I had these very powerful dreams at night. And this one dream, I remember seeing this man, and there's this kind of a whirlwind of energy, and this vortex energy. And in the center, there was this man. He looked like a trickster figure with this big kind of cowboy hat on and all the rest. And he looked at me and he said to me, "Don't believe all the images." And then when I woke up, I realized what he meant was, don't literalize the dreaming. Don't literalize every single thing that you see in the dreams. And this is what can start to happen if you have very lucid, very psychic dreams. You can start to literalize the dream state as being a complete reflection of the waking state. And that's not true. You know, the dream state is multidimensional, and it's a riddle. It is a riddle space. And with any riddle, you have to be careful. With a riddle, you have to dance it with a lot of finesse, with a lot of intuition. And sometimes if you don't understand a dream, part of the riddle is just to let it go and have a laugh. You know, have a cup of tea and a cup of coffee and just laugh, and maybe draw a picture or something. Because if you start to literalize the dream state, that's when you can get yourself into danger.
Now, talking about riddles, let's go ahead and go back, as you were mentioning earlier, about getting into Zen training. And you seem to have a pull for the Japanese style of Zen, which is, being in complete, in-the-moment reality. Or you might say they spend their waking life toward complete mastery of something. And, and they certainly do that through the arts such as kendo, or it could be flower arrangement, archery, things like that. But I found that really quite interesting that was the first step before you started being initiated into the Zosa Sagoma. But here's the other intriguing thing that I wanted our listeners to know about as well, is although you were a white man in a divided apartheid South Africa, which is where you were born into, you were born with the mark of the Sangoma on your face. Tell us about that.
Yes, I was born, and another thing, listener, it's important for people to realize that with a very strong calling, especially in the shamanic world, with indigenous shamans and these old traditions, often the mother of the Sangoma or shaman will have dreams and intuitions, and that's like it in Siberia, it's like it in Tibet, in all cultures. And this happened to my mother. She had intuitions about Africa when she was living in Dublin. So my journey actually started in the 1950s in Dublin, and it started with my mother having a love affair of Africa. And then one day, as she walked along the pier in Dublin, she was near the sea, and she had this vision of all these elephants coming to her. And she saw that as a strong sign that she needed to get to Africa. So she left Dublin, left London where she was working, and went and immigrated to Rhodesia in those days, which is now Zimbabwe. And that's where she met my father. So when I was born in Cape Town, beneath Table Mountain, and I came out with this white clay around my eyes, the birth skin. And my mother actually said to the doctor at the time that she thought I looked like a little Aboriginal boy. And the doctor was very shocked because he was a white doctor with apartheid. And the Xhosa ladies ululated the nurses, and my father smiled. And only years later, when my mother met my teacher, my Xhosa teacher, who came to our house with a white clay around her eyes, my mother remembered my birth. And then when they sat down and had some tea, she mentioned through the interpreter, this is the way John was born. He was born with the same clay that you have around your eyes. And my teacher smiled and said, well, of course, because I was born like this as well. And John was born to become a Sangoma. And then the next thing that happened for me was when we finished my training went for 10 years. It was a very long training, and it's a traditional training. So to become a shaman in indigenous cultures, you have to train for many years. It's not a couple of years or a couple of workshops. You have to really apprentice underneath a teacher. So after 10 years, I finished my training, and then my mother had another dream after my teacher left our home. And in that dream, she was approached by all these elephants. And the elephants, she was in the African bush, and all these elephants came to her and surrounded her. And she got scared, and she ran up this tree. And then the next morning, she woke up, and she had tea with me, and we had breakfast. And she said, John, I had this very strange dream, and she described it to me. And I said, Mom, next time, don't run away from the elephants. Wait and see what they have to say to you. And she was like, oh, my boy. And I'm like, yes, Mom, just wait and see what they have to say to you. And she was like, okay. And then the next day, she had another dream. So the next day, she dreams again about the elephants, and she's in the African bush. All these elephants come to her, and they circle her. And she gets scared again. She runs up the tree. So she climbs to the top of the tree. And then she remembers what I said to her the day before. So she opens her eyes, and she waits. And all the elephants stop. And then they all lift their trunks, and they make the sound. Make the sound. And then she comes down from the tree, and then she wakes up. And then we have tea again. And she tells me the dream. And she says, what does it mean, John? What does it mean? And I said, it means that the Sangomas have said thank you, because the elephants are known as Abantu Bandlovu. The elephants are a sign of the medicine people from South Africa. They are the sign of the guardians of the medicine realm. And they're saying to her, thank you for supporting me to become a Sangoma and coming all the way to Africa and leaving your family. They were saying thank you.
There you go. And instead of a brass band, you get elephant trunks.
Yeah. Well, the elephant actually, if you look at Buddhism, the elephant, like the Buddha's mother dreamt about an elephant, and she dreamt about a white elephant before he was born. So, not to draw any parallels with me as such and the Buddha, but a lot of teachers, it's kind of a thing, you know, in Asia and around the world, that mothers will dream about their child to be, or the gifts that they're going to have, especially in the medicine terrain and the shamanism, and certainly in Buddhism and in Tibetan Buddhism. It's not unusual.
Now, you bring up when it comes to healing, and I want to kind of go back just for a brief moment when it came to how you started on this journey, which was with a young 21-year-old named Emmanuel. And you said that you didn't have the tools or the experience, that you were actually more thinking from scientific and medical terms, just saying that loosely. That doesn't mean that was the only way, but you said it was the connection of a spirit. Now, in shamanism, or being a shamanic healer, that's usually the first stage, is looking right at the spirit, seeing how you can connect and communicate with that. Is that how it usually works?
Yes, that's the way it goes. I mean, we want to basically go from the spirit into the body. So if some of the herbalists, for example, in South Africa, we're using the herbs to go into the body to connect with the spirit, whereas the Sangoma is trained to become a spirit doctor, you know, metaphysician. So we are spirit doctors, and our whole job is to go from the health of the spirit, or check out the health of the spirit of the person, and then see how that impacts on the body and the rest of their life, like their emotions and things like that.
Very good. Yeah, just recently I was doing a program where we were talking about that particular thing, and you know, when you get into the strength of a spirit, and people starting to question whether or not they want to move in that direction of, let's call it, spiritual development and strengthening, and maybe perhaps choosing a particular religion or way, and then finding disappointment because for some reason they had the idea that it was supposed to give them this sort of a life, one that seemed to be free and easy of suffering, and they began questioning whether or not that work is worth it. One of the examples that I brought up with the guest was that of Dr. Wayne Dyer, who, you know, had contracted leukemia. Here was a person who was voted to be like the third most spiritual person alive. And the guest says, well, that was probably true of his body, but in his spirit it didn't touch him. And that's what we're talking about here, is building the strength of the spirit, because, you know, even in the physical world, the body does have some limitations. But what's fascinating in reading about the Leopard warrior is the deep connections that these people have with their ancestors. It's almost as though without the ancestors, they wouldn't exist in the first place. Kind of give us some idea of how that works when it comes to this philosophy, if you will.
When it comes to what?
I didn't mean to say philosophy, but, you know, the connection of the ancestors and how important that is for this culture.
Well, not just this culture. You know, ancestors is important for you. It's important for every human being.
Right.
And this is the problem in the Western world, is that people are working as individuals, and they're getting very, very sick, and they're making the planet sick, because as you just focus on yourself, I, my, me, you are just inflaming your ego, and it creates narcissism, and it creates all kinds of greed, and also creates depression, because we are much bigger than ourselves. You know, we are connected to the human family, and it creates a lot of loneliness. So about 2,000 years ago in Europe, the practices that people were doing in Europe were very, very similar to the practices people do in South Africa and around Africa. And with the onset of Christianity, all of this stopped. And one of the sadnesses of this is that the people stopped having this deeper connection to their own ancestors. So it's a bit like a tree. You know, if a tree does not connect to its roots, it's going to die. That's clear. If a tree is not connected to its roots, it's going to die. There's going to be a strong wind and nature, or hurricane, or hail, or snow, and that tree is not going to exist. So the way the oak tree survives is by having very deep roots, and the deeper the roots, the more it can grow, more it can facilitate its growth upwards into the heavens. So this is the same thing for the human being, that the more we can connect with our bones and our blood and our ancestors, the greater facility we have to connect with our spirituality and with our intuition. Because we all have part of us living on the other side, living in the dream time, living in the spirit world, and that is our ancestors. The blood in our veins is pumping in two directions. It's pumping in our own veins, and it's also pumping through the earth and into the other world. And if people feel this is mumbo jumbo, then we have to ask the question, who are you from? Are you from outer space? Are you a human being? Because if you are, you've got a mom and dad, and you need to respect them because they've given you the gift of life. You don't have to like them. You may be upset with their behavior, but you do need to respect the gift of life they've given you, and you do need to respect your ancestors because, again, whether you like them or not, they have given you the gift of life, and they have facilitated the human body that you are in right now. And if you practice Buddhism, this is the essence of a lot of Buddhist teachings, which has not been brought into the Western world because it speaks about the Sangha. You know, in Buddhism, it's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Those are the three jewels of Buddhism. And the bedrock of Buddhism is resting on the Sangha. And the Sangha is your human family. Where do you come from? Mom and dad. Those are your first two lineages. And if you ignore them, if you disrespect them, you are upsetting the status quo of your own humanity, of your own human gift. And this is what's happening in the Western world. And this is the reason why I've written this book, Leopard Warrior. And this is the reason why I'm touring in America and I'm touring the Western world to help people connect with their blood and their bones and their ancestors.
You know, and that's so important this day and age because you take a look at, for instance, in the Western world, especially in the United States, the way we view the elderly. You know, these are somebody that you kind of now compartmentalize. You put them in rest homes. You don't really want to deal with seeing how you can take care of them in your own home because you're just too busy in your life. And let's face it, in America, it's pretty difficult. It just is by the way that it's been set up. What I find unique, though, is that when you take a look at this newer millennial generation, they seem to have an interest in a connection with the elderly. They're actually interested in these, for instance, people from the greatest generation and so forth. And so you're seeing that hopefully coming back around. And, you know, so what you say is so important because when you take a look at, for instance, all these prevalent diseases we have in the Western world, you know, cancer has now become a catchphrase right up there with the common cold. And to me, it seems very alarming that we're not paying attention as to why. We're so busy at war. You know, it's the war on cancer, the fight against diabetes. I mean, there's all these wars they've created through commercialism, and you can't, and not a single one of them that I've seen so far have approached to, well, how did this all start? What can we do to turn this around? When you usually go, as we do from time to time, to these conventions, for instance, it could be a diabetes expo. They're more concerned with showing you how you can live with this thing rather than looking deeper as to how do we remove this and be in the world, just as you're saying, to be connected.
Yes, I mean, an interesting thing is if you look into ancient cultures, like, for example, I'm very lucky to have been brought up in South Africa because we're very close to the various traditions, you know, African traditions. Even though there was apartheid, we still learn some of each other's ways. And now with the Xhosa people, who I've been adopted by, the Xhosa people didn't know illness and any kind of sickness, really. All they knew was old age and death. That's all they knew. Because as they were being brought up, traditionally about 200 years ago, the quality of the herbs and the plants in southern Africa is almost as strong as the Amazon. It's second to the Amazon in terms of the biosphere and the quality of the medicinal plants. So the herbalists were very, very strong and knew how to medicate the body and help the people. But the strongest was actually the witch doctors, or you could say the sangomas, the shamans. They knew how to activate the spirit of the people through helping them connect with their ancestors, connecting with their bones. And this is one of the things that sparked my interest in African traditional healing in the South African Army, because I noticed that the black soldiers, the special forces soldiers that I was being called to look after, their bodies were healing 3 times faster than the average Western soldier or European soldier. And it was such a mystery that we were asking the question, why is this? And the answer came to me that one of the things that my special forces soldiers, my black soldier friends, what they had was this deep connection to the dream time and this deep connection to their ancestors. So it meant that their spirits were relaxed and their bodies got stronger. So this is what I want to speak about, that when our spirits are strong, we are able to withstand various kinds of illnesses. We will still get sick and we will still die. However, we are able to, our immune system can be a little bit stronger sometimes, and we're able to navigate illness with a different kind of consciousness, with a different kind of attitude. And this is what happened in ancient times, right up until the present, in certain kinds of cultures that have a strong shamanic or ancestral bent. And it's not really nowadays, I don't feel it's necessary about making people all indigenous as such, but what is important is that people connect with their indigenous soul, that they connect with their bones and their blood, and they connect with the life hereafter in terms of their ancestry, and realize that they are like a tree, and the stronger their roots, the stronger the body of the tree, and the greater facility they have to stretch upward into the ether, into the heavens. And nowadays, when people have this very dualistic mindset in terms of their spiritual practice, I call it love and light. And this love and light business, I experience a lot in the west coast of America, and I actually think it's quite quite dangerous, and it's a disease in itself, because when you're just focusing on love and light, it's fundamentalist in a way, and it's not looking at the shadow. So I feel one of the things people have to do nowadays is really, really look at themselves inside and make peace and make love to their own shadows, their own anxiety. Love your anxiety. Don't say there's a problem and you have to smile the whole time. Love your depression. You don't need to take antidepressant pills. Love your anger, and don't throw it onto someone else and make it their problem. So I'd really like to encourage a full spectrum of humanity, which means looking at your shadow, looking at the pain inside yourself, looking at your wounds, looking at your suffering. And in so doing, we can all turn into the lotus flower, because, the lotus feeds in the mud, and that's how it turns into the lotus flower. So I really, really want to encourage people to look at that inside themselves that makes them feel sad, their wounds, because that is the gateway to their own spirit.
I couldn't help as you were saying that but think of the original series Star Trek, and so it came out with a series of movies. I'm sure people remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was a particular movie where there was a Vulcan who was able to actually heal people from their suffering and from their pain. And, of course, he was using the mind meld method nevertheless, but apparently what he was doing is he was making the pain that you had inside of you, the emotional pain, if you will, become tangible. So that uplifted you to a point that you were happy. And so when you talk about this love and light movement, I would have to agree with you. And that's sort of the point I was making earlier about people pursuing a religious practice. Well, if I go to church every Sunday, and I'm praying and I'm singing the songs, shouldn't my life be consistently happy all the time? As though this is sort of a possible guarantee that removes me from feeling suffering or experiencing suffering. Now, back to this movie in Star Trek, Kirk, who everybody who's seen the series know, Captain Kirk, he says, I don't want this guy bothering me. He says, I need my pain. And I thought the genius in that, because it's the pain that gives you that particular energy to make you make bold decisions in the face of suffering, to help you maybe have the compassion to make the right decisions in the arena of suffering. And as I was reading in Leopard Warrior, that seems to be sort of that thing that you're talking about, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, there's an English expression which is called grist for the mill. Grist for the mill is where they need some kind of grist in the mill in order to turn the engine of the wheel, to turn the mill to make the bread. So if there's no grist, then it's hard for the mill to turn. And it's another analogy I could use is the analogy of the salmon. The salmon has to swim upstream to spawn the next generation. It's not going with the flow, swimming down towards the sea, because then the next generation of salmons is not going to happen. It has to go against the flow, it has to go against the tide, and it has to swim up against the rapids. and that's nature's way. That's the salmon. And there's a whole lot of mysticism in the Celtic culture in Ireland around the wisdom of the salmon. And it's a bit like that with us as human beings. In order for us to find our calling in the world, we have to go against some kind of challenge. We have to go against our edge. We have to find our edge. We have to struggle a little bit. And in so doing, something inside of us awakens. And that's our human consciousness, our human spirit. And that's what I call the way of the salmon. And it's also the same as the leopard, you know. As you're going through your challenges, whether it's walking through the African bushveld, being a salmon and swimming upstream, or being a human being and having to navigate all the spiritual and political problems we have nowadays, it turns us into better people. And if you just want to kind of switch the switch and feel good the whole time, that's what's called addiction. You know, that's why you have heroin. That's why you have heroin addiction, which means feeling good the whole time. You have alcoholism. You have people addicted to all kinds of a pharmacopoeia because they want to feel good the whole time. And I'm not judging them, because if you've got an addiction, it's a serious problem. But if you are looking for always feeling good and then you feel bad and then you blame other people for the badness that you're feeling inside yourself, this is what creates warfare. And nowadays there's a lot of projection where you're blaming other people for the problems you have inside yourself, and this creates conflict in communities, and this creates warfare in the planet. And the warfare only stops when the human being says, I'm going to own my shadow. I'm not going to be afraid of my shadow any longer. Right. I'm going to make love to my own shadow, whether it's anxiety, whether it's jealousy, whether it's pain, whether it's wounds. I am going to feel everything. And then we have hope in the human race.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's really fascinating when you look at what you're talking about here. Even Anthony Robbins, who's considered one of the great coaches, you know, out there in the motivation movement, if you will, he talks about that very same thing. He says, you know, if I'm going to blame my mom or my father, my teacher, my best friend, my cousins, whoever I'm going to blame for all the bad stuff in my life, I'm also going to blame them for all the good stuff in my life as well, because it's those people that made me who I am today.
Yes.
And I thought that was a great way to put it, you know, and he was absolutely right. You know, when you're looking at something to blame, if things aren't working out in your life and you got somebody to blame, but at the same time, you need to go up and thank them for having that opportunity to blame them for showing you something that you didn't know was inside of you, that you got to take a look outside of you of what that actually was. Pretty fascinating stuff. I wanted to get to real briefly here, too, because I really enjoyed this part of your book, as we keep talking about trees and from time to time healing with herbs and so forth and so on. I like the Western culture has a crazy way of looking at this sometimes, because they like to extract the components away from plants and say this is what you need more of. You know, you see it in commercials, you read it in magazines. If you're having this suffering here, then what you need possibly is more in this. And did you know that came from the aloe vera plant? But nobody could probably tell you exactly what an aloe vera plant looks like, probably. And in fact, in Oregon, which is where you said you were doing one of your speaking engagements a few years back, I believe it was Ashland, there is a family called the Botankos that are really big about teaching people about good nutrition and plant life and so forth. And on their website, it was pretty comical what they had done. They had actually put images on one side and then a set of images on the other. Now, on the left side, what those images were advertising trademarks. You know, for instance, Nike, can you name this symbol? And they said it was remarkable how people could actually tag those at about a 70-75% accuracy rate, that you knew what the Nike symbol was, whatever the case is, Kellogg's. But on the right side, what they had was trees, leaves, and bushes. And most people were lucky if they could land 10% of knowing what those were. You know, like you didn't know what a maple leaf was, for instance. And I think about the disconnection that we have seen when it comes to that and the plant world. And I love what you were talking about in the Leopard Warrior when it came to plant spirits and how you show these things respect, and that in your dreams, as you were talking about, how plants would come into your dreams, for instance, to communicate who they were and what their purposes were. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, with the plant spirits, it's quite interesting because, and this is where I needed to be part of a community of elders and of this living indigenous tradition, because I didn't know what the dreams meant. So I'd have these very mystical dreams about, say, the plant spirits, but sometimes I didn't know that they were plant spirits. So I had to go to my teacher and describe what I saw and speak to her about it. And then only then was she able to say, okay, well, that was the spirit of this particular plant, you know. And then things started kind of coming together with me, and then we did another initiation, and so I went with my apprenticeship. So yes, the plant spirit is it's a very mystical dream when you dream about the spirit of the plant, and then the next thing is to go to the plant or the tree, make an offering of tobacco or some beads or some kind of gift, and just to mindfully touch the plant like you've made a new friend. Because at the end of the day, this is all about relationship. We are making relationships with the outside world, with the plant spirits, and then they're making relationships with us. And this goes beyond the human body. It goes beyond the here and now. It goes into other dimensions. So the human being, and this is one of the reasons why I touched on dreams, or we've spoken about dreams, we are, as human beings, multidimensional creatures. And the default of the human being is a loving creature that communicates with all the plants and animal beings in the world. And part of the practices I'm bringing, and the reason why I wrote this book, is to help people go back to this natural default setting that we all have inside ourselves.
Now, this natural default system, let's talk about that a little bit. What is that exactly?
It's listening to your heart. It's taking your shoes off and standing on the ground. It's feeling all the pain inside yourself but not blaming anyone. It's breathing all the way down to your toes. It's standing tall. It's looking up at the stars and feeling the connection to the stars. It's feeling the bones and the blood inside yourself and realizing that you are much bigger than you are, and that you are connected to a whole stream of people going backwards in time and also going forwards in time. It means that your heart is open and available to the suffering of the world, whether that suffering comes in the form of a frog or an insect or an animal or a human being. It means that your intuition is alive, that you are awake, that when you see something, you see it. When you're breathing, you smell. When you hear, you hear. When you touch, that you are awake in every sense of the word. But mostly, your heart is awake and available to sense the feeling in the world.
Ah, very nice. I know just about 2 years back, I started brewing my own kombucha, and this will kind of seem maybe a little bit off the track, but I don't think so. And so when you go, and for anybody who's, wants the kombucha is just the sugary tea mixture that you make, and then you put this thing called a SCOBY over it, and basically the SCOBY feeds off of that and converts the sugar into probiotics, really good bacteria for the body, especially the digestive system. Anyway, what's funny is when you go, like, let's say onto YouTube or you look in books, how they talk about this SCOBY. Well, it's this kind of slimy look, and it just doesn't look so pretty kind of a thing, And at first, as you're doing this, you might think that, but what I was amazed by is I got this, and I let it grow the first time in my little 1-gallon jar. I picked it up because it looks delicate, like something that would be slimy, but what was amazing was the feeling of almost like shark skin. Like I was like, boy, this is a hardy little creature here. And from that moment forward, each time I brew it, I kind of like pick it up and I'll play with it a little bit. I'll actually talk with it, like, hey, guy, how are you doing? You're beautiful. Now I'm brewing up to like 5 gallons every 2 weeks now. It's amazing how these things grow. But it's also fun to pick up and play with, and then at the same time when you put it back, you realize what's really going on in there, that I'm actually creating a live, living food that I'm connected with, just like what you're talking about here. Mm-hmm. But you'll show this to some people, and they'll just be like, ooh, like they don't want to touch it. And I'm like, no, this is really quite an amazing little live creature, and it actually knows that you're thinking this. I mean, well, how can that be? And I said, well, let's take a look at it this way. Bacteria have been around for billions of years, okay? They've evolved to where you are fully bacteria today. And they have been able to do this because they have found successful ways to be able to do this. So when you're out there and you're thinking that your doctor or maybe in a commercial are saying, well, you got bacteria that's causing germs, that's causing your sickness, so we've got something for you, they're going to find a way around that because they're a lot smarter than we are. And this SCOBY knows you're talking about it that way, and, well, you might have some sour kombucha if you keep that up.
Yeah, I think this is what's amazing. There's such intelligence in the natural world, and the default setting for a human being is a very intelligent creature. And to find this intelligence means to drop our awareness into our senses, to become like the leopard, to open all your awareness, to open your sense of smell, taste, touch, feeling, awareness, intuition, to really open your awareness, to open it without judgment. So this is where the love and light thing comes in. If you're stuck in a love and light mindset, then you're stuck in dualism. It means, oh, I'm not going to listen to that because it's not full of love and light. I'm not going to smell that because it's a bad smell. I'm not going to touch that because it doesn't feel good. So when you're looking and you're feeling and you're tasting and you're observing, you have to go beyond good and bad. You have to go beyond dualism. So when you're looking at something, you're just looking, you're just observing. When you're smelling, you allow any kind of smell to come through your nostrils without good or bad as a filter. And when you're opening your heart, you allow yourself to feel everything without a filter. And that's when we can reach true intelligence.
Right. You know, and you mentioned, now are you going to be going back up to the Northwest when you're in the United States?
When you say Northwest, what town are you talking about? Like
No, not any particular. Are you going to be like in Oregon, for instance? Is that one of the areas you're going to be going to?
I've already been to Oregon.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to Santa Fe is where I'm going after this.
Oh, okay. Well, we actually are down in Arizona now. So anyway, that being said, what I wanted to mention was when you were talking about these things about, you know, feeling and touching and senses with everything that you are, I think that's a great practice for people to be doing on a regular basis. It's pretty amazing how you start seeing and feeling and experiencing the world. But up in Oregon, there was a gentleman that we had connected with, and we interviewed a guy by the name of Mick Dodge. And National Geographic did a documentary, and this is a guy that truly lives in and of the land. And so we put him, he's on our website at beyond50radio.com, but you look at this guy, and at first, your first glance is, this guy seems like kind of a wacko. He's like a cross between Sasquatch and maybe a Hell's Angels hippie or something, you know. And so, you know, that's your first thought. Your first impression is this guy's nuts. But when you listen to him talk, and as I interviewed him, I thought, this guy has a deep innate intelligence that people really need to listen to. And one of the things he talked about, as you talk about touching, feeling, so forth, is if you go on YouTube, he talks about, for instance, the feet, because he runs around without shoes in the forest. And he says, you know, the feet have something like 20 or 30,000 nerve endings. And he says, you know, it kind of gets a little used to when you're running these paths and so forth, but what you're actually doing is grounding, because you'll feel that rock as it pierces your foot. You know, anybody who stepped on a Lego in the middle of the night knows what I'm talking about. But when, you know, it was a way to put the perspective of what you're talking about, that we really need to connect with that and really see and experience the world coming alive in front of you. To me, I think that'd be a great way to eliminate boredom. It's certainly better than television.
Yes, and, you know, carrying on from what he said, I realized with my practice something very interesting, and I'm only speaking about it now, so this is kind of fresh knowledge I'm disseminating, and that is when I studied Zen and I went to South Korea and I studied martial arts in terms of Qigong and Tai Chi, we speak about the center of the human body as beneath the belly button, and that's the center. So you're breathing in and out into your center, and the Zen masters speak about activating your center. But then when I went to South Africa and I trained with my Sangoma community, and we danced and we sang and we danced and sang and danced some more, and we do all the dancing barefoot, I realized that the true center of the human being is underneath the feet and the place that you call the soul. Isn't that interesting? The sole of the foot is the true center of the human being. And if people are feeling depressed, take your shoes and socks off, guys, walk outside. You will feel better within 10 minutes.
Guaranteed, too, and just breathe in and out. You got those two things, you're doing you're doing pretty darn good. And I was going to say, in relation to the dancing, maybe somebody out there is thinking, oh, that dancing, that's all nonsense. Really? Well, what about the phenomenon of Saturday Night Fever? Do you remember that one?
I love that.
That got the whole world popping there. Well, John,
take your shoes and socks off.
Yeah, take your shoes and socks off and dance the hustle by the swimming pool with the wet water under your feet. You got it. John, always a pleasure to have you on the program here again. The book is The Leopard Warrior. It's a journey into the African teachings of ancestry, instinct, and dreams, and I think I know it's something we can all use no matter where you are. Is there a website people can find out more about your work and where you're going to be?
Yes, thanks, Daniel. My website is just my name, so it's johnlockley.com, so John, and my surname Lockley, Lockley, johnlockley.com, and my next place is Santa Fe, and then I'm going to Maui, and I'll be doing some work in both those places.
Oh, right on. Now, I got one more thing we can leave with the listeners, too. If you feel like clearing negative space in an area, let's just say, or a feeling of negative space, what would you suggest people use to be able to do this?
You're asking me, yeah?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I think there's different ways to clear negative space. I mean, the one way that's quite popular in America is sage, where you can just burn some white sage and move it around the place. But there's another way that I'm teaching, that is just, again, taking your shoes and socks off, or just using your feet, stomping around the place in all the corners, and just making some sound. And the sound would be, a lot of people are familiar with the sound of Aum, and you could go Aum, or you could do the sound of Mama, which is Ah. You could go Ma. And there's also another sound you could do, which is the Su, S-U, and with the high frequency of the Su. And you make these sounds around the space as you're stomping your feet. And this can help move on negative energy, yeah.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun. And for the millennials out there, we won't judge you, but if you want to play Taylor Swift's Shake It Off, we'll let you do that too. But make sure you're doing the stomping. John, thank you again for being on the Beyond 50 radio program. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you so much.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can discover more also by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do post archives of our talks up there, so you can find out if you happen to miss this or you want to share the link with other people so that they can enjoy what we're presenting here. You can certainly do that as well. Find us on YouTube, 50 Beyond, and Beyond 50 Radio as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.